Welcome to the Bullits and Bourbon podcast, where it's not about the bourbon, but more about who you share it with.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bullits Bourbon, episode 46. We've had a couple already, so I do apologize. We are very, very blessed and lucky to be on location at Stoll Wolfe Distillery here in Lititz. I said that right?
Yes, you did.
PA, with Erik Wolfe, who is an amazing man of whiskey and just wealth of knowledge. And we've been having a great time so far, even though we brought Craig with us again. But, we need somebody to carry our bags. In any event, I'm just kidding. I love you, kind of. We've had a blast. Erik and his wife, Eviana, I'm so excited to jump into the history of this, Erik, and just, talk about what we have on the table in front of us and your brand. And there's some extremely deep history, not just to PA, but really whiskey in general in America. I mean, there's some foundational roots, I think, that I'd love for you to share with us. So tell us about Stoll Wolfe before we get to sipping, because sure. I love the name, and there's a lot to it.
Oh, well, thank you guys again for the chance to be here and to talk whiskey. It's really amazing, the local history and Pennsylvania history of whiskey that essentially is hiding in plain sight. There's so many folks that aren't fully aware that it was Pennsylvania that sort of developed American whiskey as an industry first, and then Kentucky happened to sort of take that mantle and run with it. But the rich history of rye in this area is 3 centuries essentially, and it's a story of immigrants, it's a story of survival, and essentially the story of necessity of preserving grain at that time.
Right.
So we're just thankful to be able to help carry on that legacy.
And the name Stoll Wolfe is pretty cool, because obviously Wolfe's your last name, and but Stoll is a name that I think a lot of people in the whiskey world that are nerds, like all of us, they know it. But for those that are kind of getting into whiskey, or maybe those that don't, Stoll. Talk about Dick Stoll. I'm going to pull your cord just a little bit here. There you go.
Thank you very much. So Dick Stoll, an amazing gentleman, our partner and mentor, really just a heavyweight in the world of whiskey, but some folks aren't necessarily aware of his legacy. So for us, once we started looking at preserving the local whiskey history in the area, did some research and found out about the history of Pennsylvania Michters, and the folks that had put their heart and soul into making that what it was, history going back to 1753 with the Schenck family. And upon doing some of that research, learning that the last living link to that distillery, Dick Stoll, was not only alive, but living in the area. And that he wasn't back in the industry or producing, for us, it just became a mission to reconnect and to be able to work with him to preserve that knowledge moving forward. So thankfully, due to a local historian, Ethan Smith, putting us in contact with Dick's wife, we were able to work together to preserve some of this local history that, again, going back to 1753, you had immigrants coming to this area, mostly from the Palatinate region of Germany. And when they got here, it wasn't this beautiful farmland you see now. It was very wooded. And for a lot of the folks coming here, they'd never owned anything before. They couldn't own land in Europe.
Yeah.
So to come here, clear that land, doing backbreaking work, plant crops, have the luxury of having them actually come and be able to be harvested. They weren't about to allow any of that grain to go to waste once they had done all that backbreaking work. So this area was truly the frontier in the mid-1700s. So for those folks to actually hang out a shingle and say, we're distilling year-round, first time that happened in America, according to the National Register of Historic Places, was just 6.5 miles up the road at Schaeferstown. So for us to be able to work with Dick Stoll, help preserve that knowledge, become family along the way was another side benefit, but just to help preserve some of that knowledge and the generations prior who had done such an amazing job with Pennsylvania rye that anyone even cared that we were helping to revive it. which it's just amazing what a rich legacy there was in the area, and how quickly overnight with prohibition and changes, it shifted to tobacco farming, and the alcohol history was just sort of quickly
cast aside.
Yeah, quickly cast aside. So,
we were talking about on the way up here. We were discussing the legacy of Stoll. And something you brought up too is that I don't know if a lot of people understand the steps of whiskey in America. I mean, I think we've hit this on other episodes. Like, you got bourbon. Everybody knows bourbon. Kentucky bourbon. And there's nothing wrong with Kentucky bourbon.
No, it's fantastic.
We all love it. It's fantastic. But to understand Kentucky bourbon, you first have to understand whiskey in America, which started, no BS, pretty much PA. You don't have bourbon without rye.
That's exactly it.
And you don't have westward expansion without that rye or that whiskey being a currency. Yep. That led to exploration and land claim rights and everything else. And I did not realize until today that a very super important name in whiskey, they're from here. They're from this area, and that's the Beam family.
It is. No, and it's fascinating to a lot of folks where in this area, if you tell them the Beam family started here, a lot of local folks don't believe it and are shocked to learn where if you go down to the Beam Distillery in Kentucky, they've got a giant wall of lineage 3 stories high, and the top of it is Jacob Boehme, who started in what is now Berks County, Pennsylvania. Used to be part of Lancaster County. So, and as we were joking before, just geographically, you couldn't get off the boat in Kentucky.
Right.
You had to hit the East Coast first and then work over. So for a lot of folks, it was basically if you were the youngest son in a family, there just wasn't anything left. Or if you weren't the oldest son, rather.
Right, yeah.
There was nothing for you. There was no farm to inherit. There was no land for you. So you had to go west or south and try and make your way. Yeah. So it's interesting to see even generationally. And I know I was speaking with you guys earlier about Alan Bishop, who's out at Old Homestead Distillery now in Indiana. And there's so much German history in the Black Forest region of Indiana. But it's interesting how some of those traditions are just slightly different than the folks here, only because it was another generation younger. And then the longer they were out there, some of those traditions they evolved over time. So pork and sauerkraut on New Year's Day is just what we do. That's the smell of New Year's Day.
Oh, that sounds good right now.
Much to my wife's chagrin. But in Indiana, that's not something they do quite as often as we do here. So really interesting to see how this is even sort of a snapshot in time of that area as well, where rye grew particularly well in this area. It was something that the immigrants were comfortable growing and familiar growing. As hard as it is for us to think about now, corn wasn't. Most of these folks hadn't dealt with corn in Europe at that time, or if they did, it wasn't the corn that we think of now. It was much more Native American style corn.
I didn't think about that, but corn is
corn is key. And speaking of corn, what do we have here in this class?
Oh, yeah, Dan's like, I'm ready.
He's like, I'm ready for a drink.
You poured yourself a big ass pour.
I didn't pour
I
this.
am guilty of pouring that. Sorry. When I heard he was a corn whiskey fan, I was like, okay, here.
He's just recently converted, but he went all in. So tell us about the corn whiskey, because this is pretty. Which is this bottle right here.
Cheers. So this is 80-20, 80% corn, 20% malt, and the corn is grown on a family farm that is just up the road from here. It's been in our family since 1741.
Wow.
So it's my 9-time great-grandfather, my dad's 8-time great-grandfather. We didn't get very far in the last nearly 300 years, about a mile and a half down the road. Our cousins still farm the land today. So for us, this corn whiskey is a throwback to a different era, a different style of whiskey. Again, as we were talking about before, you guys passed endless amounts of acres of corn on the way in. So for us, it's definitely a love letter to Lancaster County, a throwback to another era, and just for a lot of the folks that come in here, it's the first and only corn whiskey they've ever had. So we do make the joke quite a bit that it's the best and worst corn whiskey they'll
ever have, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and this is obviously the unaged version of it. This one's at 109 proof, our barrel entry proof, and it's definitely very unique compared to the rye. We get a lot of folks who even are tequila drinkers that seem to enjoy the sort of oiliness that the
smell.
You can see the legs on this.
But the nose almost reminds me of a hint of like tequila.
So I get that a lot of times.
That's what I was getting earlier.
Like rye White Dog has this like natural sweetness to it that reminds me of tequila. It's very tequila-esque. But this is very oily, very mouth coating.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
because
I knew you would.
I do.
More ways of
the more wood, the better for Jim.
I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole, but
the legs on it, the oily, the viscosity of it. I mean, you can see it shines for corn whiskey.
Oh, cheers. Well, we do have some aging out as well. And by designation, it's in reuse cooperage. So it's interesting also to even see an older age corn whiskey is much more similar to Scotch in terms of the straw color that comes out of it as well.
Lighter.
Yeah.
I get some dark chocolate notes on this.
Oh, cheers. I see. I know exactly what you mean.
I pick up that almond again that we talked about earlier when you were doing when we did the tasting. I get the almond notes from it, and I don't know if that's just because it's on my mind.
I get the almonds, but I mean, I definitely taste dark chocolate
in the finish.
In the finish, yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I know you have a deep respect for the history of whiskey, bourbon.
Sure.
I know you know a lot of historical facts about predating you. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were in New York prior to coming on this journey, working up there. And given what this week is right here, Patriot Day, we just, it's a big week of reflection this week for the country, though. But if I remember hearing you on a previous podcast, how did 9/11 affect you? And was that a turning point for? How did that affect you in getting to here in this journey of your life?
That's a great question. So for me, I was in New York on September 11th. I was living in the West Village, so actually had friends visiting that day. So we saw the first tower come down on TV, and they asked if we were close to it. So I was just mentioning that if we go over to the West Side, we could probably see what was going on. And seeing the second tower come down, I was.
You physically saw it come down.
Saw it come down, and I think for me, trying to process things like that in real time are, I think, almost impossible. And I mean, you guys have served. I'm not a brave person. I'm not someone who's used to putting themselves in, and I wasn't in harm's way. I don't want to mischaracterize it, but to see folks who were the best and brightest and had jobs in the World Trade Center, and the early bird gets the worm, and the people who try the hardest, it should be a meritocracy and they should be rewarded. But I think for me, the realization was just that all of that could go away in an instant, and you kind of have to love what you do. And I, after that, ended up starting to work with my hands and working in food service, which ultimately led me to be here. So it's amazing how so much of what was otherwise such a horrible day could potentially lead to something so positive, and ultimately comes not full circle, but enables us to help others, where we have worked with some veterans groups to help introduce them to whiskey making. The idea being that the artisanal nature of production involving 5 senses is such a good way to pull people out of their own anxieties and their own the things that they may be dealing with from those experiences. So it's in general, I find making whiskey keeps you very present in that you could get burned, cut, blow up, it really is the kind of thing that as crazy as it sounds, I do enjoy that aspect of it, and it really does keep you present as you're producing.
And I think Jason hits this on a lot of our podcasts. He says the reason why we like a lot of these local distilleries, and it's no knock on the big guys, but you guys put your blood, sweat, and tears into your product. Literally, but also just, before the podcast, talking to you, conversation, you could see the passion. You could hear the passion. Yeah. Like, you're not just putting out a product to put out a product, but you're actually putting out a solid product every time, taking your time with the process, making sure you got that process done.
Had your wife not been here, thank God for wives.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Because between the 4 of us, I think we're all sitting there, and listening to you, and then Jim would bring up something, and then Craig would ask a question, and I'm kind of taking mental notes. And I'm like, the historical part alone, we could spend.
Oh, we'd still be out there talking.
We'd still be out there talking, and we'd be shit faced by. By what time is it? Yeah, we wouldn't be going anywhere. At the moment that we came in and we looked in the book.
Yeah.
And so, guys, I can't tell you if you're in Eastern. We're in Eastern PA technically.
Yeah,
we'll call it Eastern.
A little bit too close to Philly for my taste.
Yeah. Here we go. So if you're over this way, you make the drive. It's a beautiful drive. The countryside is just beautiful. It's calming. You come in through the town. The town's like almost like Old Town Alexandria. Coming in there, and have a drink, have 4 drinks, try a flight. We're going to talk about some of these, but there's a book. And I'm guessing that you'd probably share that book with anybody.
And that's my dad has put that book together over the last 6 years, and there's just so much history, and it keeps growing that we actually keep the books in a loose leaf binder with plastic pages because we keep uncovering more information, and then it's got to get shifted further
Left
back
or right.
up.
Yeah.
So we're up to. You guys saw 2 of the books. I believe there's actually 4 books.
Holy crap! I thought they were just 4 different copies.
No, there's 4 different binders worth of information.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, between York and Lancaster County, so the county next to us, there were approximately 500 distilleries. I think it was like 300 in York.
Did you know that?
100 in
I had
York,
no
200
idea.
I had no idea there were that many.
Yeah, get some, Kentucky. What's up?
And it's interesting because this area, Lancaster County, is still the most productive non-irrigated farmland in all of North America. So Central Valley in California and Florida do produce more, but using irrigation.
I was going to say go Florida. I use irrigation.
So, but the oranges grown in our area are terrible. So you guys still have that.
Yeah.
So
Go oranges.
But what's amazing is you had these immigrants coming here, growing as much grain as they did, and they weren't about to let any of that go to waste.
Right.
And again, because it was the frontier, there wasn't great infrastructure to send it elsewhere. So for them to process that grain, we were talking earlier about the reductive nature of distilling, specifically with apple brandy, that it would take 10,000 pounds of apples to get 1,000 gallons of cider to get the 2 barrels of apple brandy. Where with that, again, great way to preserve things over time. Great way to take those carbohydrates and sugars and concentrate them. So in our area, no coincidence that history was here, especially given the folks that were emigrating at that time and the technology available at that time. Also, fun fact, our downtown has more historical buildings from the colonial era than colonial Williamsburg, only because we're German and we don't like to get rid of things. So, and they built them really well, built them out of stone. With colonial Williamsburg, they didn't know that would be a historic site someday.
Yeah.
It's a so amazing history there. But in our area, we do have quite a bit standing from nearly 300 years ago.
See, I had a great joke for that Germans don't like to get rid of things, but I think it'd be in poor taste.
Footnote, we lived in Germany. Our German friends are going to, hey, I'm just letting you know, some of them watch. Like,
But I didn't say it. I mean, I thought it, but I didn't say it.
In our area, they said that we were so frugal that it bordered on being cheap back in the day. So maybe it's just a genetic trait that we've.
That's my kind of people, though. I mean,
Yeah, right.
So you said something that was interesting that I think I've known this, but I didn't ever hear it explained the way you did. But when the German immigrants came over, they were considered Deutsch. And we were talking about Upper Germany, Lower Germany, especially with accents. Like you may have a touch of a Bavarian accent or a what was the other one, Dan, from Northern Germany? They had a distinct word for it, a Hamburg accent or a Northern.
Very loud, obnoxious.
Well, yeah, when they get drunk. The Bavarians had a much more. There was definitely a different accent, but when they got here, they were considered the Deutsch, which then in this area became
Pennsylvania Dutch.
Pennsylvania Dutch, which people have a misconception that when they say Pennsylvania Dutch, that they're talking about the Dutch, and it's really Deutsch in German, which is your fingerprints on this area, and frankly, all the way out into. I mean, you hit Pittsburgh, and now you have a collision of Polish and other, different, ethnicities or cultures that collided because of the river trade as well.
It's so fascinating. Even the style of barns in our area are slightly
German.
different than
Yes.
the barns that you guys have out your way, where we've got the traditional bank barns.
Yes. Yep.
And again, where that 2-story accessibility, the ability
with the ledge over the hangover is very German. I noticed that the moment that we got into the county.
And even the houses in the area of Germany that our people are from look very similar. Their roofs are slightly more pitched because I think they may have got more snow.
Yeah.
But again, which translates perfectly to the distilling, because when they got here, they weren't going to start distilling corn right away. They weren't going to. That was a new crop to them.
Yeah.
They were going to take the rye that they knew and actually use that too. And the only difference between here and Germany was that they actually had enough to feed their family and still make whiskey out of it. Because there they had to pay the feudal lord, they had to pay the church, there were all kinds of different taxes. And if you had a bumper crop, great. The person who owned the land got more grain that year. You, as the tenant farmer,
didn't get anything.
That was no bonus for you.
Yeah.
So, and they talk about even just people living longer as they got here, people getting bigger and taller, and just the general abundance. So it's interesting how that story of whiskey sort of parallels the American experience in a lot of ways, and parallels the journey to America, in addition to the colonial experience of the early loyalties to America, that they could actually own some land, that they were enabled to rise or fall by their own merit, where you can sort of start to see the beginnings of, not to get overly sentimental, but the beginnings of the American dream.
Right.
And if you drink enough whiskey, you can
You'll feel it.
you'll understand that. It's
You get more passionate by the sip. That's
exactly.
Getting back to whiskey, I had a question. We didn't really get into this earlier, but kind of just to get to know your history with whiskey. What's kind of your journey into whiskey? Like, what got you started? And then from there, kind of how did that inspire you to start a distillery?
Oh, well, thank you. So again, we were saying thank goodness for wives. So I grew up in this area, and when I left to go to college, I, like many people at that time, said that Lancaster County had nothing for me, and I was going to leave and never come back, and it's all farmland, and I'm looking forward.
Yeah.
And so cut to the youthful naivete. So I did live in New York. I worked for these digital agencies and did some really fun, interesting, cutting-edge, cool stuff. And then September 11th happened. And again, just that reframing of things, that things could go away in an instant. And I wanted to be able to... the thing with the digital environment that I worked in, I couldn't physically point to anything I did. I could point to a screen. I could reference things, but there was no... If I disappeared tomorrow, there would have been no physical evidence that I existed. Sure. So, not to get too heavy or anything on a podcast, but that said, then fell into the world of food, because to me, food is it's the great equalizer. We all eat. So once you start looking at food traditions, and I've always been a history nerd.
We know you eat.
And always been a history nerd, always loved history and the way it has united people through time. But then started looking at Lancaster County food traditions. When I was in New York, the farm-to-table movement really caught hold. So I was working in some restaurants, and all these people were referencing Lancaster County chicken or Pennsylvania Dutch this, where I was like, I know for a fact that that's not from there, and they're trading on that history, and that's okay, but it was sort of being washed with that local farm-to-table. So started digging and seeing what were some of our local food traditions, and realized the history with the whiskey, which, again, hiding in plain sight. The Michter's jugs referencing the 300-year history were on everybody's shelves in Lancaster County. We just never read the back of it.
Sure.
So once we started to look at that, and again, thank goodness for wives. So living in New York, my wife and I had our daughter, and we were driving home from Thanksgiving vacation in Pennsylvania back to New Jersey, where we had a restaurant just outside of New York, and talking to my wife and saying, I think we need to come back to this area. I just feel I want to raise my daughter in. As you said, the town is very special.
Yeah.
My wife refers to it as Pleasantville. Tom Wolfe said he could never go home again.
Similarities.
But he didn't live here. You can go home again. So for us to give my daughter that small town experience, so my wife very kindly, said, well, what would you possibly do there? You work in New York City at restaurants. maybe not so kindly. So, as we're having this discussion, I kid you not, they talk about, well, it's a sign. There was literally a sign that said Michter's Road that we were passing. And I said to her, I was like, how about that? And now my wife and I, for clarification, my wife and I got engaged because she said to me, she's 6.5 years older than me. So she said, well, what are you going to do? Be my man? What are you going to propose to me? So a lot of the good things in my life have come from her throwing down a gauntlet and challenging.
A bit of provocation.
That's
right?
exactly it. Yeah. So that's it. We were literally passing that sign, and I pointed to it and I said, well, what about this? And my wife's job is to give reality to my crazy ideas, which I have a lot of. And on the rare chance that she acknowledges that it's a good idea, I know we're on to something. And in that moment, she was like, actually, that would be amazing. Nobody knows about this history, and we're so close to it. And so for us, it's in the same way that when you adopt a pet or you find an antique or you meet your spouse or I think that it's finding you as much as you're finding it.
Yeah.
This, in much the same way that Dick never set out to be a distiller. I had asked him how he's like, I showed up at the unemployment office after serving in the Korean War. There were a lot of people unemployed. They sent me here. I worked hard at that, and ultimately, so the universe had a plan that I wasn't necessarily aware of.
Yeah.
It was a long and winding route, and thank goodness we were too dumb to know what we didn't know. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And in attempting to revive some of that history, there's so many. When you set out to be a distiller, in your head, you're running the still, you're checking proof, people are trying your whiskey, they're carrying you on their shoulders, he's a jolly good fellow. That's not always the reality. As you guys saw today with our production area, there's so much maintenance, there's so much cleaning, there's so many minutes that go into all the setup work in running the still that running the still is one of the things you actually do the least of.
Sure.
So for us, having a mentor like Dick, whose background was in the operations and the maintenance and the making. So just a little clarification on Dick. He attempted to resign as master distiller of Michter's at one point after Charlie Beam had gone back because he said, well, I'm ignoring my maintenance duties. And I was like, well, that was a good negotiation tactic on your part. He's like, no, I was worried that if the maintenance, he's like, I felt like I could teach other people to distill. The maintenance, if that's not done properly, you can't run the still at all.
Right. Yeah.
So interesting the way, and for us being connected with somebody like Dick who truly had so much knowledge. And I had said previously in other podcasts that we were very blessed that no one else had approached him first. And Elaine actually did pull me aside and reminded me, she's like, no, there were a few other people that had approached him. Mm-hmm. You guys were just the ones that he felt compelled by. And hopefully it's some of that same spirit that you were talking about today where I refer to myself kind of like a golden retriever. I'm going to get hair on you and slobber on you and hug you and do whatever. I'm going to try not to hump anyone's leg. But that said...
Don't get excited, Craig.
Yeah.
Now you're speaking Craig's language.
Yeah.
No. But from the start today, we've met a number of people in the industry, and you see some people that are in it for the money alone and maybe a little bit of the prestige.
Yeah.
And they don't care what product they're pushing.
Yeah.
Where, sitting down with you, and just right off the bat, you could tell you were hyped up, you were passionate, you were excited to really show us what you guys are working on here.
Thank you. And also, just in all fairness, off camera right now are my dad, Jim Wolfe, my wife, Aviana Wolfe, who are also, again, it's such a team effort. I'm blessed in that I get to talk about it, mostly because they're tired of me talking about it. So go talk to these other people and leave us alone for 10 minutes. But it's the kind of thing where it truly, and thank you guys for your passion as well, because we could make all the whiskey in the world, and making whiskey sometimes is a very lonely pursuit, and no one's watching to see if you're doing it right but in attempting to uphold Dick's legacy, in attempting to uphold the legacy that Dick was able to work with and the people that came before him, it's respect for moments like these where folks get to enjoy it and geek out, and also the folks that came before us where we're so blessed to have a legacy that we help represent, and we're only a portion of that. There are many other folks that do represent that legacy, but part of it also, and part of the fear there is, man, those are some big shoes to fill.
Oh yeah.
And to not mess that up is just, for us, the years that we were working to get the distillery open and Dick was still alive and we weren't producing, were incredibly anxiety producing for me.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Because I met this man, I promised him we would return him to distilling, and then it takes a little bit. And you talk to any distiller out there, if you want to make God laugh, tell him when you're going to open your distillery. And invariably, it is not going to happen. It just won't. It never works that way.
Yeah.
So that said, to have a mentor like Dick that knew as much as he did and had so much to share and a finite amount of time, he was human. Now, the only thing he ever did that was evidence to me that he was human was when he passed. Up until that point, I was pretty sure he was immortal. Because he just was so old school. He was one of those guys, and I used to joke with him, it wasn't old school to him, it was just school. Because that was just how you did things.
That was his routine. That was nature for him.
And he was a veteran as well. He had served in the Korean War, in the Navy, working on the forerunner of jets at the time. And his dedication to craft was such that he was in the Korean War. He was served in the Mediterranean, a little bit around Cuba. I think that's probably all declassified by now.
Yeah.
That's, that said, he was in the Korean War. Theoretically, the Korean government wanted to kill him as a soldier. The only batch of whiskey that he ever felt bad about was that he had at the end of Michter's some what he thought was grain that had gone too far. They made him distill it, and ultimately that grain ended up in Korea. And I had said to him, that is amazing. He's like, I felt terrible that grain got distilled into whiskey. It was not my decision. They made us do it. And I was like, but you send it to somebody who was once your sworn enemy. He's like, I don't care. It's whiskey. Like,
still my whiskey.
Yeah, exactly.
My name's on it.
If that's any evidence that, again, a nation could take up arms against him, he would still want to make sure that they got good whiskey. And then the most amazing thing is A.H. Hirsch, which, for those of you that aren't aware, A.H. Hirsch was one of the first sort of older sourced whiskeys that hit the market. I believe it was the late 80s that it came out. It came out for $80 a bottle. It was 16 years old at the time. And a lot of people wouldn't buy it because $80 for a bottle of 16-year-old whiskey was unheard of.
Can you imagine what that will go for today?
Now, it goes from anywhere between $7,500 a bottle, depending on the wax. There was a charity auction where it went for over $10,000. And so in speaking with Dick about this, and the interesting thing about A.H. Hirsch was this came out after Pennsylvania Michter's had closed. Mm-hmm. Yep. Dick was working as a custodian in an elementary school at the time this was released. And this bourbon got a 5-star review from F. Paul Picot in a very prestigious competition. So it was basically
first 5-star, correct, Eric?
First 5-star bourbon. And so one of those things where it basically put American spirits on par with European spirits. So similar to the way that the first time California wine was awarded the same awards as European. Yeah. So again, Dick is working as a custodian in elementary school at this point, and so many folks had asked since then, what did you do that made that whiskey so special? And he was incredibly honest about it. It's like it was the exact same whiskey we always distilled. It happened to sit longer. And in his mind, a bourbon over 10 to 12 years old at that point was over oaked. The barrel had sort of eaten the distillate and kind of taken over. So for him, it was just so fascinating to see a move towards older spirits and higher proof with those spirits as well. But again, the fact that he was part of such a amazing legacy and such a humble man was just really made him such an amazing person to learn from.
And you've mentioned him. I mean, you cannot mention Stoll and Wolfe without Dick Stoll. But just the level of reverence and respect that you have for the history, but for Dick Stoll too. I mean, I think that's evident in the whiskey. We got to taste during the tasting. That was fun. It was just fun for my belly. I mean, especially, but we kind of finished that tasting with a bit of conundrum of like, oh crap, what are we going to buy? What's my credit limit on my credit card? What am I going to get in trouble for? So we have in the cup one thing, but before we go on is, when we first introduced ourselves to Stoll Wolfe on the podcast was we had this bottle, I believe, which was the rye whiskey, the 90 proof.
That's right.
And so walk us through the 90 proof and then into the single barrel in the Caribbean rum, which is we have the single barrel on the cup. Yeah. So, for the viewers to understand, we have our rankings kind of in our head already. I mean, this is you start off here and you will not be disappointed. This is a wonderful pour. Dan, Jim, Craig, Ty, and I, we damn near crushed. I don't know what's left of the bottle. I don't know where it's at.
Yeah, I think we finished it the day we did the.
I had two.
We did the Stoll Wolfe, Dad's Hat, and the Liberty Pole.
That's right. Yeah.
Because I ranked Stoll Wolfe 1, Liberty Pole 2, and then Dad Hat's 3 on that episode.
What?
But it was the cola. It was the.
Oh, because you didn't like the. That's
I'm
right. Because we did a
cola.
bourbon. We did Liberty Pole bourbon, and it was the RC cola.
Yeah.
That's right. Because you were just
Yes.
dumping that shit.
Yes, I was.
So tell us about it. Let's walk through them.
Sure. So this is sort of our flagship offering. This is a 2-year rye. It's a sweet mash Pennsylvania rye. Mash bill is 60-30-10. So 60% rye, 30% corn, 10% malt. So the corn is all coming from the family farm that's just up the road. Again, sweet mash rye, and this is a mash bill that Dick Stoll is very adamant about. It's very similar to a Sam Thompson pre-pro rye that they did at Michter's. A little bit more rye content in there. And with this, what we're hoping to do with our rye is reintroduce some folks to Pennsylvania rye. Now, again, love or hate our rye, it's just one style of rye. Again, as many folks out there probably know already, to be a rye in the United States, it only has to have 51% or more rye content. So theoretically, 2% difference could change it from a bourbon to a rye. Yeah. So with this, there's some folks out there that when they hear there's some corn in a Pennsylvania rye are not quite sure what to make of that. Some folks aren't even necessarily familiar with the product category. When they do read about it, are curious how we arrived at that mash bill. And Dick's philosophy on that was just that to truly experience the flavor of the rye, that by adding some corn to it, it's very similar to adding a little bit of cocoa to a chocolate cake recipe. You can only taste so much chocolate. I'm sorry, adding coffee to a chocolate cake recipe, excuse me. The coffee actually, you don't taste the coffee in there. The coffee helps coax out different notes. Enhances that cocoa. Yeah. So for us, this is the corn, and also as mentioned, so much corn in our area, very emblematic and very representative of our natural, of the area. So for us, 90 proof, we wanted something that would hold up in cocktails, but also drink well. And the other one that we tried after that was the single barrel in that, single barrel in the same line, exact same mash bill, same production process. As we're pulling barrels to blend for our standard rye release, we note the ones that have a little bit of extra unique character in there. So what we're always trying to do is create something that's, if you open a bottle of Stoll Wolfe rye, we always want it to be above a certain level of quality. But we feel like when folks get bottles that are even better than they were anticipating, that's not necessarily a bad thing either. Right. So for us, this is the DVD, or I'm aging myself now. This is the movie. Good guy. This is the VHS tape that you have to rent from the store. Now, this is the film that you can go and watch, and you can quote the lines as they're going to happen and know exactly what's next. This is the play version, or if this is the album, this is the concert, where slightly different in a good way, but if you don't experience it, one of a kind, you're going to miss it, and that's okay too. But a more unique sort of.
And that's what we're sipping on.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is. This is an absolute mouth just pleaser. That sounds weird. Craig will get excited at the end.
You say it's weird every time, but you say it like every other podcast. It feels so good in my mouth. I don't know what I mean.
Yeah. Anyways, it's delicious. The single barrel jumped out for all of us. I mean, we were kind of looking around. trying to kind of discern the flavor notes and stuff. Yeah. But the mouthfeel, the legs on it, the viscosity of it, just you had some good thoughts on this one too.
Oh, absolutely, it's delicious. I get a nice, now that it's sat for a little while and going back to it.
Oh yeah,
really nice honey and dried apricot on the palate, and then on the finish there is nice rye spice, a little bit of pepperiness. Just a delicious rye.
Oh, cheers! Thank you.
Great hug, Craig. Was this one your favorite out of it?
Yeah, this was number 4. Was that 4?
No, this
was number 3.
I think I did 3, 4, then
4 was the Rosen.
Yeah, the Rosen. Correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
the
3
Rosen,
was my favorite. Correct.
Yeah, which we want you to talk about that because it's going to be a future. I think that's going to be a future banger.
Oh,
absolutely.
Cheers. And last thing about the single barrel, that one is at 105 proof, so there is a little bit more of that barrel character in there.
All of them are like that
as well.
Sure.
So, and then last but not least of the ones that we tried was the. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The next one that we tried was the Rosen.
The Rosen.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So, and that was one that we had pulled a sample of, knowing you guys were coming in.
We appreciate that.
Absolutely. That was a treat.
That was really good.
Well, and just for the folks at home, so we started with a 2-year, then we had a 3-year. The 4-year was the Rosen that we got to try. And as we were saying during the tasting, I didn't want to characterize it before you had a chance to try it, but I was very happy to see everyone's reaction to it. It's one of the things with working with an older varietal of grain that hasn't been grown in a long time is it is a lot more work. It's a lot of effort to do it. It's expensive. It's just a lot more effort, which is great as long as the flavor is commensurate with the effort. So it's just so nice. In the beginning, when we would taste folks on the Rosen, and they would ask us, well, what are the characteristics of Rosen? Or what is the future of Rosen? Or what will this taste like in a few years? And we had to be very honest and say, well, you're going to have to come on the journey with us and wait and see.
Come find out.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Do it together.
And for us, part of the exciting thing is we only have a few barrels of some of this 4-year. The stuff that's coming down further down the road, we've increased the acreage that we've grown every year. So for us to have more barrels to be able to pull and get it in more hands is really exciting as well. So the 4-year Rosen will be coming out over the next month or so. Extremely limited quantity. We're only going to be releasing one of the 2 barrels just so we can allow the other to get more age on it.
Dibs.
And that's we're going to check your trunk before you leave just to make sure that there's no barrels sticking out.
Group order, so we save on
that
shipping.
said, is the Rosen possibly going to be a staple with you guys
that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So yes, we are trying to we're increasing the acreage so that more and more of our products will feature Rosen in the future as well. So
I see it like.
So we're probably going to have to wait another 4 or 5 years till it's a steady line coming out.
It's very similar to like Liberty Pole has the old Monongahela that has now become kind of their everybody. It's just kind of taken off, and I can see that. Whereas the Rosen is going to become like the Gucci, like the Gucci on that side. Like, I mean, this is an amazing everyday drinker right here, but the Rosen was a different level of. I don't even know how to explain it. It just really was a great sip.
Well, you like the legs on it. You like the viscosity of it. It had really good flavor.
Oh, cheers! Thank you.
Yeah, it's tough too because I think you're naturally you gravitate toward a single barrel, right? So I see single barrel on something, I'm like, right, but. The Rosen, I don't know. That's a very tough call between the single barrel and the Rosen.
Well, and we were having this conversation right after the tasting too, because folks ask us all the time what our favorite is, and it sounds like we're being coy when we say, "Well, it kind of depends. What's your budget and what you're looking at?" But for us, they're all our children, and there is a time where. You hate all your children. No.
Yeah, well, he's not wrong.
No, but they each have their own sort of unique character. And we do try when we're even thinking about products and products that we're going to create, it should be a family. And some cousins within the family maybe look a little different than others or have different personalities, but
what that's
still
like, right, Craig?
part of the same family. So I think just for consumers at the end of the day to even be able to wrap their mind around what we're doing, that there is a through line through all the products as well.
Yeah.
So and the sweet mash is definitely again more expensive, more time consuming, but we think definitely does create a very unique flavor with the rye.
That rosin is going to be I think it's going to be very, very successful. It's so flavorful. It's such a if you don't understand rye, you only know bourbon. I encourage you understand what rye is, understand the history of it. And I may mess this up, but rosin is a revived strain, right? It's a revived strain of grain. That should be a song.
Strain of grain.
So I mean, it's an ancient grain, if I'm correct, right?
And it was developed, and I've heard several different stories of how it was developed. But the one thing that I do know for certain is it came from Russia and was developed for growth in Siberia. Basically,
very resilient.
Very resilient,
right.
And then ultimately, it seems like Michigan State's agriculture program was what was involved in bringing it to the States. A lot of the rye that was grown in Michigan ultimately was distilled in Pennsylvania, just sent out by railroad car. So after Prohibition, a lot of that stopped being grown because there was no demand for it.
Right.
That's where there was a little bit of demand for it with Pennsylvania mixers, and they kept some of that going. But then as they didn't require it anymore, there really was almost nobody using it. So for Dick to be able to be the first one to distill it after 5 decades of it essentially going away,
right,
was definitely a very very special moment.
What was pretty interesting too is that your family's farm is 300 years old, roughly, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to dedicate a certain acreage toward growing the rosin.
Yep.
And it's a gamble because if either you said it, you're nervous. Like if it doesn't do well, people don't take to it, they don't understand it. Well, you just wasted acreage.
Well, that's it. And the opportunity cost of what could have been grown on that acreage. So with the corn in Lancaster County, some folks are getting 200, 250, 300 bushels an acre. With the heritage varietal of rye, we're lucky if we get 45 bushels an acre. So for us, and because we're working with family and because we do value the role of farmers in the ecosystem of what we do pay more for our grain than we would have to. But to us, it's just part of that ecosystem and trying to be an honest broker. And with that, also just knowing that there's a reason the farm's been around for 300 years, and that's because they managed it well. We don't want to be the reason that suddenly goes away either.
Right.
So that's a challenge. But for us, even learning how to grow the rye, knowing when to harvest, knowing when it's, because so much of the literature that existed had gone away. So we're initially even looking at growing the rosin and working with Laura Patrizio, who's been so amazing and such a huge, she and Dick were the ones that started this whole thing rolling. That without her help, and she sent us black and white sort of drawings of the feek stages to know when to apply growth inhibitor to make sure this didn't get too tall and want to lodge. Right. The only problem is someone forgot to tell the field that it had to be homogenized and all at the same growth state at the same time. In addition to the feek stage drawings that we had were actually for wheat because they didn't exist for rye. So for us, even working with our cousins who've farmed the land for so long and an agronomist who is very familiar with growing different types of crops in the area, it's still a very iterative process. And even this year, because of the way the rain came and because of the way deer, it turns out, if there's a field with heritage varietal crops in it, invariably the deer eat those, or the organic crops where they know. I don't know how they know, but they know.
I can be of service. I will be of service.
Please.
I can serve.
And again, it's one of those things where I'm not a hunter. I've never wanted to shoot a deer more than I did this year. But I was like, look, you're cool. I've seen Bambi. I would definitely be crying after I shot you, but I will do it at this point to save that
Right up
whiskey.
until I
venison
see
tastes
it,
so good.
smoke it, and cover it with some
Yeah,
Monterey
exactly.
Jack cheese. And then you'll be crying a different kind
Yeah,
of cry.
no. And again, in our area, it's amazing. Just it's amazing there still are deer after they're being farmed for so long.
They're living off of the farms.
Oh, they really are.
They walk by and they're like,
It's so
what
true.
for lunch?
No, it's and for us, truly just learning more about the vocabulary of farming and just really helping to, in some way, hopefully elevate all the work and toil that goes into that hopefully some folks can understand a little bit about how much dedication it takes to farm land like that. And we get questions all the time. Well, when are you harvesting your next rosin? We're like, well, next year. What do you mean?
They don't realize
It's
how long
like-
it takes for rye.
Right.
To
That's
actually
exactly
reach
it.
maturity.
And to your point, when we tell people that we'll be planting in the next few weeks for next year, that doesn't make any sense to them because you plant in the spring and you harvest in the fall. Except for cereals that need to be in the ground. So the rye needs a good hard frost to actually be able to produce. So it's so interesting when we're explaining to them, and this is one of the few months of the year where I'm not religiously watching the weather, because otherwise I've got so much inventory sitting out in that field. And you ask folks all the time, well, in any business, you'd leave hundreds of thousands of dollars of inventory sitting out in a field, unguarded, where animals can get in and do it. And they're like, absolutely not.
Derek the
We're gonna
deer's
run
marching
by.
around with his big old belly.
Well, that's it. And in farming, that's exactly what you have to do. Is just and if there's a frost, a hail, wind, whatever it is, that's so.
By extension, you suffer with a farmer's plight.
It's so true, which only seems fair at the end of the day, because if you're just buying commodity grains from a grain broker, you're not necessarily invested with the
In that
farmer
part
in the
of it.
same way.
Well, with the local farmer, like we were talking earlier about farming, how difficult it is, but it's so industrialized now. But the fact that you guys are supporting local, it's a family farm, but like there's a lot of Pennsylvania distillers that I think are doing that as well, and I respect that a lot. The fact that they're getting local grains and supporting, you're supporting them, they're supporting you. It's a great.
It's an ecosystem, right?
Yeah,
you're feeding back into the ecosystem. In that it's not just growth for you, but growth for them. It's not just suffering by them; it's suffering by you. If you lose a crop, or if you have bad weather, in your mind, I'm sure shit. I need to scrap all these plans I had for the rosin rye and shift toward maybe I have to now do brandy, or I've got to increase just regular rye production, or I've got to, all of that's a shared consequence.
No, it's so true. And I think for us too, it's one of those things where, again, shout out to Craig, Erik, and Wes Klein for all your hard work, and also for putting up with us, because they're so awesome. They've been farming their entire lives. Here I come in and I'm talking to them about this stuff, and I'm like, I can ride in the combine when you harvest? And they're like, yeah. What does it mean when someone's like, I get to be here when you mash? And I'm like, you want to get wet and dusty and whatever? Sure. But to them, again, they've been so inclusive with us, which is so awesome too, to even just see, to be there when it's planted, to be there when it's harvested, and have that deeper understanding. But yeah, it's a really as a whiskey geek, it's just fun to follow those rabbit holes and just see how far they go.
Well, we're super pumped to 1 month. We're talking 1 month.
So yeah, should be about a month to 6 weeks. Every time I give a date, again, that's when God laughs.
Yeah,
He's
he
like,
pushes it back
no,
a month, right?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So listen, Stoll Wolfe ship all over the U.S. So you don't need to be in PA. So keep your eyes peeled. Jump on their website, check them out, take a look at what they got.
But I'd say if you get the opportunity, definitely take the drive down.
Yeah.
I mean, the history, because where you got the still at, that's been around since what, 18
Yeah,
The building is 18
So
what?
the building is from 1850s. It was originally used as a 3-bay grain mill. So for us to be able to return it to its original purpose of processing grain is just so.
Yeah.
I think that's so awesome. Just the history, and like you said, it's like coming to, that what you see on the movies. That,
Go to Philadelphia. And
No, do not go to Philadelphia. Fly to Pittsburgh and take the drive. Do not fly to Philly. Fuck Philly.
I knew it was going to come out. Here, Laura's going to flip. Yeah, right. So go to Philly.
Don't go to Philly.
Just check it out. Go see the Bell. Go run up the stairs and do the Rocky. Grab you a Philly cheesesteak and
Throw a
then
snowball at Santa Claus.
Yeah,
Stop giving Philly so much love.
score some drugs.
Can't forget about that.
Oh wait, you can't do that. And then drive this nice, beautiful drive through the farmland.
The drive is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean it was therapeutic, and I was driving, and these guys were they were sleeping.
It wasn't therapeutic for us. His driving is.
Shit. Listen, everywhere is Fallujah, but when I got here, it was a lot calmer. And then come here and just sit in this room. Go sit at the bar. The bar is beautiful. The bar is just bright, and it's a cozy, comfortable atmosphere.
Well, the photos, the history they have, you can tell.
And if you're a fan of Michter's like I am, the amount of old decanters you guys have, I love it. I'm like nerding out over the history of all the Michter stuff you guys have.
Oh, thank you. No, and for us too, just we always try to say that our tasting room is an embassy of PA whiskey, and just that if we can help folks just understand a little bit of the history that we have here, and just help turn them on to how exciting rye can be as a category. It's just amazing. Sometimes working around rye all the time, you're like, well, everybody knows rye by now. It's 2024 and the category's matured, but every day we have the opportunity to meet folks that it's the first rye they've tried. So it's very exciting. It's also the kind of thing that is, as we mentioned during the tasting, love it or hate it, it's only representative of a style of rye.
Right.
So we do encourage folks to please compare and contrast it with other ryes. There's some amazing producers in the state doing awesome stuff that you guys were mentioning earlier as well. So yeah, it's really just the stories, the history, and then the fact that rye makes a hell of a whiskey. I mean,
it does. Absolutely.
So many of the classic cocktails are
Old
based
fashioned,
on
right?
Rye
That's exactly.
based. I mean, I love
yeah.
Sazerac. That's probably that's taken over the old fashioned.
Oh man,
Sazerac.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not one of these things where you got to have just one favorite. I love this. I love how you contrast the styles of. It's like, rose and rye now is seriously is going to preoccupy my thought process, right? And there are ryes that I've had from other states that, I mean,
but to his point, it's a different style of rye.
it's a different
right?
style. It doesn't hit quite the way that PA ryes, especially the distinguished ryes, hit. They just hit. I don't know. Maybe it's the history part ties it. You just
tastes better. Yeah.
It just tastes better. Yeah. I mean, and that's not a knock. I mean, I love the art of craft. I love the passion that goes into it. I love the consequence of the hard work. And 5 minutes after being here, we felt like family.
Oh no, likewise. I mean, when I started giving you guys shit right away, just because
I was like, oh, he speaks our love language.
And again, I've seen people show up to distilleries with like clean boots or do whatever and try and beat where it's like, no, man, you need dirty boots. You need to give each other shit. You need to. This is like we work for a living. This is exactly.
Yep.
So no, it's just so. And again, to give folks some history that they can truly take down literally off of a shelf and interact with is so fun. And just to help create new sense memories that do create a link to that past and give folks a new experience to draw from is very exciting for us and something that we really, they talk about liminal spaces where you've got sort of 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the present, or you're on the precipice of something. And for us, we try whenever possible to help encourage that. So, but impossible if folks aren't open to it. So thank you guys for being so receptive.
The pleasure is definitely all ours. One of the things before we wrap up, and we don't want to go too long, I want to talk really quick about this barrel finish Caribbean rum cask because for those that are not maybe they're not sold on rye yet.
Yeah.
And we talked about this. I cannot think of a better way to, if you got a little bit of the sweet tooth, right? You just need a little bit of that sweet tooth. This one hit. This was the one that you, Craig, you really liked this one the most, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it did have that little bit of tang sweet to it, right? I could devour. Now you have a port rye too, don't you?
We do have a port rye. That one is finishing up now. What we try and do is make sure that they see at least 4 months in the cask,
Right.
And particularly summer months as well. So the port should be coming out probably in the next, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks as well. So
6 to 8 weeks is going to be great.
we'll make sure to send you guys a sample. of
Sounds
that
like
as
he's
well.
suckered us in for another trip down.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Come back
We're
on
around.
6 to 8 weeks.
He goes 6 to 8 week, 7 to 10 week?
Yeah.
6 to 8, 6 to 8.
When you guys are available, because that's when. Yeah, exactly. Whenever you guys are available, that's when we'll release.
Yeah, so no, in all seriousness, if you want a starting point for rye, if you're just a little apprehensive, dive into this. Okay, get an offering from West PA, get an offering from East PA, get an offering from don't worry anywhere else. But try these out. Take a look around. The entire state of PA. Embrace the movement toward rye. I was a bourbon guy. Started off Jack, went to bourbon. You guys know this, and then was force fed rye. And
thank you, Jim.
Thank you, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dan, for getting the bottle of brew rye. And now I'm an addict. I mean, I think of rye more than I think of bourbon most of the time. Most of the time. I mean, until there's an online release someplace that I know I won't get it. But don't sleep on what's happening in PA. You've got a ton of attractions around here. This is a beautiful spot. It's comfortable. It's warm. It's inviting. I mean, we had and it's pretty cool. What would you call the area back there?
Our production area.
Production area. It's got some really it's cool. The still's cool. It's just a neat place. And I'm excited because when we do wrap up and we're going to go look around Lititz, and I said that right again, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
In charge today, boys. Night's young. We're gonna check out the Michter's
Distillery.
Michter's Distillery. And now we want to go see. Was it Baumgartner's?
Baumburgers?
Yeah, Baumgartner's.
Yeah.
I messed that all up. I'm thinking of something else. His house. But now you said that the architecture. Now I just want to go down Main Street.
Oh no!
And
see
see
the old
this.
buildings. Yeah.
And see it. Yeah, I'm a nerd like that.
Oh no! I'm very blessed. And again, I had said that I sort of ran away for college, and again, just the embarrassment of riches in this area that I truly had to go elsewhere to appreciate. But just again, the generations of families that live here, and the folks like my wife who aren't from here but choose to adopt it as their hometown. Truly, it's again the first football game I took her to on a Friday night with she was like, I thought this only existed in movies. I didn't think this was real. I was like, well, but they got the movies from somewhere. Right?
Right.
So we're very blessed and appreciative for the opportunity.
We can't thank you enough for hosting us and just putting on a wonderful, absolutely wonderful display and the passion
thank you
the
guys
passion
for
for what you're
coming
doing.
What time did you guys leave to be here this morning?
5:30. Get to my house is like
5:30.
5:45.
Okay, so we're recording now about 2:00 in the afternoon, but these guys have been on the road. I don't know what time you had to get up.
This is what we do for whiskey.
I got about 5 a.m.
Yeah,
For whiskey people.
So thank you guys for making such a huge effort.
No,
Totally worth it.
Absolutely worth it. I can't wait to head back out. What's going to happen is that my wife Jennifer's going to hear this and she's going to be like, "Well, I want to go."
Oh, perfect.
Shit.
So, all right, and also, I don't know, this could be cut out, but Jennifer, you're extremely welcome to come anytime. You guys are all welcome. Please.
Edit.
Yeah, we don't edit.
Dan's like, I don't know how to do that yet.
There's no editing anything. No, we're just very, very blessed and very thankful that you have us. And we have whiskey is we say this a lot, but whiskey is always better with friends.
So true.
And I think one of the central things about whiskey, and the more we do this, the more I really appreciate this, is that you learn a story of somebody. You learn who they are over a glass, and we're very blessed that we can go around, we can do this, and we're not getting paid. Well, kind of.
of course, Ambassador LaFave. Long-winded to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Let's go, Ambassador LaFave.
He's like, I want to go. I want more drink. No, but genuinely, thank you, Eric,
Thank you guys.
and to your wife
Thank
and
you
your
so much.
and your father for just bringing us in open arms and pouring whiskey down our throats. So,
Oh, no, our pleasure. Thank you guys. You're
As we-
welcome anytime, please.
as we always say, until next time, stay thirsty, my friends. Cheers.
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 Cheers, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast of Bullits and Bourbon. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.